Is it time to dismantle some doctrines? If you don't know what that means, then come along with me. I'm Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Bible college teacher and pastor of more than 20 years. Join me as we deconstruct whatever dogmas and beliefs have held you behind, and together work to reconstruct and rebuild your authentic self. Hey everyone, welcome to this final episode of the Dismantling Doctrine Podcast for 2025. We've got a really fascinating conversation coming up in just a few minutes with Brandt Burleson. I've been previewing this for a while. He lives in Houston, Texas, and for a long time worked out of the Israeli Consulate there in Houston. And I'm just going to let this story play. It's quite a long episode. It's about an hour-long chat between me and Brandt, but rather than trying to break it up into two halves, I'm just going to let you listen to the whole crazy conversation. You'd think it's a conspiracy theory, but he lived it. He worked there. He's blowing the whistle on what happened there during his time at the Israeli consulate. It's really crazy stuff. So stay tuned for that, just coming up in a few minutes. Just want to let you know what's coming up next year. We've got a couple of episodes already in the can. As I mentioned before, I had a chat in December, early December, with Brian and Troy, the former host of the I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist podcast from Australia. That may be one of the last, if not the last, actual interviews or podcast episodes they do. I'm not sure. Had a really good chat with Brian and Troy, though, so that's coming up in January. But then before that, we're going to do a crossover episode with Nick P. from the Autistic Pod. We're going to do a double episode, so the first half will be on this show, and then the second half will be on his show, or maybe it's the other way around, I'm not sure, but stay tuned for that coming up. And then for those of you who follow the show, who support it on Patreon, wanted to say thank you to my good Scottish friend Alistair for renewing his subscription, as well as a thank you to Kathy, who is the latest Patreon supporter of the show. So thank you both to Alistair and Kathy for your support. I was going to say too, if you're a Patreon supporter of the show, you will have access to our really great Dismantling Doctrine Podcast Zoom calls. We usually hold these once a month. We just had one a few weeks ago as I'm doing this recording now on the 7th of December with Marissa Burt and Kelsey McGinnis, who wrote the book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. And I'm going to be posting up that video when I get a little bit of time on the Patreon page. So if you want to see that, you have to be a Patreon supporter of the show to get access to that video to see our conversation. I might even be releasing that as a podcast episode. I'm not sure. It was a really good sort of follow-up to our conversation of a couple of months ago about their book. And then we've got Catherine Spearing booked in for January of 2026. I think that's going to be on the 18th of Jan. We're going to be talking about her book. She was just on the show a little bit ago talking about her book, 1,000 Tiny Paper Cuts, all about the insidious nature of spiritual abuse and life on the other side, talking about recovering from spiritual abuse, spiritual gaslighting, things like that so many of us experience within evangelicalism, or maybe perhaps a high control religious group or cult. If you've come out of that thing, then you need to recover, and you can do that on the back end. And we're going to be talking about that in the month of January with Catherine Spearing. So that is going to be a really good chance to meet her, kind of pick her brains all about spiritual abuse and life on the other side. All right, let's get on into the conversation here with Brandt Burleson out of Houston, Texas, as he tells the story of weaponizing Christian nationalism and Christian Zionism in the Israeli Consulate in Houston. Absolutely crazy story, but even weirder, it's all true. So enjoy this conversation with Brandt, and I will see you in 2026. I'm happy to welcome Brandt Burleson to the show. Welcome, Brandt, to the Dismantling Doctrine Podcast.
Hi, great to be on.
Yeah, and I'm trying to go back. We've actually chatted on the phone. We talked several months ago, but now how did we actually meet? Did you come across my podcast? Is that how it worked? Or I'm trying to remember how we actually met.
I'm trying to go back on that too. I think I got you first came across my radar with the podcast, but it was because I had read Tim Sledge's book and then saw that there was, I guess, a computer might have like recommended your book to me since he edited your book. And yeah, so I really enjoyed your book as well. And I think that's how I came across it, and then started watching a few episodes of your podcast, and then just thought I'd reach out to you. So
Yeah, because I was thinking a few months ago, as we're doing this recording now, I did a presentation for Houston Oasis in Texas, which you're
yeah,
located somewhere in Texas, aren't you? You can't be that far from
yeah, I'm in
Houston.
Houston. Yeah.
You're in the Houston area. So did you end up going to that presentation? I think you went
Yeah,
live,
I
didn't
was
you?
there. I actually, I was the person that I think I asked you the question. Don't remember exactly how I phrased it, but I asked, if you could shed more light on religious trauma syndrome coming from someone who's like in the leadership of something rather than, amongst just the flock, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, but yeah, really enjoyed getting to hear you there as well.
Yeah, that was really good. The only unfortunate bit was there was some recording glitches. There was some live because we were
Yeah,
live on
yeah, there was a.
YouTube. There was about a 15-minute delay where the channel dropped out, and then I realized I went back on the Houston Oasis YouTube channel about a week later because I was going to show my girlfriend. She wanted to watch the video, but it
Mhm.
cuts out about 10 minutes into my presentation. So I don't know what happened to the last half. In fact, I got an email from a woman about 2 weeks ago or a week ago. She said, "Hey, I caught your presentation at Houston Oasis on the YouTube channel, but it cut out. Do you have any more resources on religious trauma syndrome?" So I actually pointed her to some of the past podcasts I did with Dr. Marlene Winnell and some other therapists
Mm.
talking about RTS. So yeah, there was an unfortunate glitch there. If people headed over to the Houston Oasis YouTube channel, my presentation cuts out about halfway through, which is really unfortunate, but it's just one of them things.
Yeah, I don't think it cut out in the actual session
Yeah, the
because
live
I mean,
feed.
I knew there was some issues with like the audio when we first started, but yeah, I mean, we heard the whole thing there, so I guess you had to be there
It's
live to.
yeah. The really strange one is that because I've done several of these online presentations before for different conferences and things like that. We did the conference on religious trauma a few years ago, which was originally
Mm.
going to be held out of Vancouver, BC, but because of COVID, they ended up doing it on Zoom. But the weird thing is you don't see the audience. And I had the same issue with the Houston Oasis thing. I was just looking at my screen on the computer here in the UK. I couldn't see anybody. I
Hmm.
couldn't see any reactions. I couldn't see I just talk. I felt like I was
Yeah,
talking to myself for about half an hour.
that's got to be a tricky way to do it, I'm
It
sure.
was, yeah, but I always love talking about religious trauma syndrome. Now, getting back to your story, I mean, are you a survivor of religious trauma syndrome? Because I know we talked before on the phone maybe a couple of months ago. You've got a fascinating story that we're going to get into, but what's your backstory in terms of religion? Because you mentioned something about your story is kind of an inverse to Tim Sledge's in his Goodbye Jesus. There is a parallel there, isn't there?
So, where Tim Sledge was the son of a alcoholic and then became a pastor and became an atheist, I was the son of a pastor that became an alcoholic and then became an atheist. I guess you could say I have a religious trauma syndrome, but it's not quite in the way that I think people would assume when they first hear that. Growing up, I didn't have any. I had a pretty ideal childhood, I would say, and adolescence. My relationship with my parents was great. It's still great. My father came out of a more like progressive or moderate oriented denomination. It was the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. So much, yeah, completely different world than the
Yeah,
Bill
more
Gothard
fundamentalist.
type thing you were experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I did grow up in Waco, which was a little interesting because I grew up in a town that kind of existed in the national consciousness at the time based on this deadly siege with a cult that happened there with the Branch Davidians. So yeah, most of my experience growing up was, I was a pretty liberal Christian growing up in like a sea of conservative Christianity, though, being in Texas, and then having this weird Waco element as part of it. And then I didn't want to become a pastor or anything like that. I mean, I was a Christian, but it wasn't the central focus of my life ever. And I went to I ended up going to college and majoring in international relations and then getting a graduate degree in international relations. So my religious trauma doesn't really start until significantly later in my life. So I finished grad school in 2013. And then there was a few years there while I was doing, like, I worked at Domino's and Pizza Hut after I had a master's degree. I was really struggling. I had all this student loan debt. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, like, if I could only find a job that was in my field that was just, decent pay, and I'd be satisfied and happy. And I now look back at that as like a be careful what you wish for moment, because eventually I applied for a job to be an executive assistant for a consulate, and it didn't say which one. So I didn't know exactly what I was getting into. And I ended up not getting that job. But I found out when I went to interview, okay, it's the Israeli Consulate. And randomly, the CG, so just for your audience that might not know, the Consulate General is the building itself. The Consulate General is the top diplomat who runs that facility. So a consulate is pretty much like a miniature embassy, like in a country as large as the US, that covers as much area and has that size population. There'll be the embassies always in the capital city, and then there'll be a consulate, in Houston, Chicago, LA. Yeah. And so the consul general at the time asked me just randomly, well, like, what did your parents do when you were growing up? And I mentioned, well, my father was a pastor, actually. And then he kind of immediately goes, oh, well, even if we don't choose you for this position, we do have another thing that we're going to open up probably in a few months, which would be kind of more of an interfaith position, and acting as a liaison mostly to the Christian communities in the region. And this region was Texas, New Mexico, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and then for a while we had Kansas as well. So 5 or 6 states.
Yeah, so big region.
On the year. Yeah. I mean, it's like I think that's like the size of like France and Germany combined or something.
Right.
But yeah. So, and like Texas by itself is almost like 30 million people. So
Texas is huge. That's the thing I try to explain to people in the UK, that the economy of Texas alone is bigger than most countries. Same with California. I heard somewhere that the economy of California is bigger than all of Australia. I mean, that's just crazy thinking that that's just one state out of 50 states. Well, I was just going to say, going back really quick, you said you were the inverse of Tim Sledge. Going back to your father, so he was a pastor. Did he become an alcoholic and then an atheist?
Oh, no, never.
So who was...
No, my
father to clarify that.
Still a pastor. Yeah, and we actually have a pretty great relationship, I'd say. And I can just give you a little snapshot of that, because I'd like to get into like the kind of more personal aspects of all this. But I can remember when I first became an atheist, that wasn't until 2020. And we'll get to like the job, back to that in a second.
Yeah, there's a whole backstory there.
Yeah. So for a whole year, I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. Maybe this is just a phase. And then I was like, okay, I can't handle just having all these thoughts and ideas alone. So I told my wife, and then eventually and then a bunch of my friends, and then and they took it pretty well. And then I remember I had made the decision to tell my parents, and I kind of wrote them a note. And then this was during COVID, so we did this via Zoom instead of. I would have preferred to be
in person,
actually make the trip there, but it just wasn't as feasible. So and I was worried that they were just going to be heartbroken or think that they messed up or get really sad or like try to reconvert me. Like, I don't know, just, my mind's going all these places.
So you're talking about, wait a minute, you're talking about when you made the decision, I am an atheist for sure, I'm no longer a Christian. That's what you're talking about.
And then I wrote them a letter kind of explaining how I felt, and like how this wasn't like an indictment on them or anything, that I loved them and everything. And I remember my dad was just asking, and he was like, so do you believe in, I can't remember exactly how I phrased it, and I mentioned, well, I do kind of think a lot of religion is predicated on a death anxiety, or like this wishful thinking that you're going to be around forever and ever. And I just don't, I kind of realized that I was really believing in this mostly because I really psychologically, I think, needed to have that idea in my head, because the thought that when it's just lights out, it's over, I think was terrifying. And I think when I actually said that out loud for a moment, I was like, oh, this is just me wanting this to be true. And anyway, so I told him that, and he goes, well, I want you to know that if it turns out that I'm right and there is something after this, and we find ourselves outside the gates of heaven, he said, if you're not allowed in, I'm not going in. And I
Wow.
thought that
Okay.
that was like an extremely moving thing. Like, it's almost like he's the anti-Abraham, if you will. Like, he's gonna
Yeah.
suffer alongside his son instead of
That's the
going
opposite of
in. And
what a fundamentalist would say. I mean, a fundamentalist
yeah,
would
exactly.
absolutely
So
turn
like,
around and say, "You're going to hell," and I'm just going to
yeah,
keep praying for you and keep preaching at you until you're converted, and So that's
right.
his
So
progressive Christian roots, I'm assuming.
exactly. So none of my, like, I guess what I mean, I would probably say I have religious trauma. I'd be interested to hear, like, you have much more of an expertise and have been thinking about this a lot longer, and I'm still kind of processing all my stuff, but
Hmm.
it definitely does not pertain to my childhood or upbringing. It's all like starts pretty much in my 30s.
Yeah.
So, well, fast forward here back to it's 2016, and I get that call later. Hey, we're opening up that position. Do you want to do it?
Right, from the Israeli
Um,
consulate.
right. And so I foolishly at the time thought, like, I didn't know anything about Christian Zionism really. I didn't know how weird it was and how, like, kind of crazy it can get. And I was just thinking, like, oh, they want someone to, like, help promote tourism to Jerusalem to
Yeah.
go see this. I was like, that's pretty innocuous. And I was thinking, like, yeah, this will look good on my resume. I can do this for a year and use this as like a building step to the next
Yeah.
thing.
Springboard to
And
a better position
yeah,
somewhere else.
and that did not happen. Like, that was
That's like the farthest
because,
from what
like,
happened.
yeah, and it like, so, and again, like, when I did my master's in IR, like, I mostly focused on South Asia and Southeast Asia. So, like, I went, I spent most of the time focused on India, Pakistan. I spent like did a semester there. I did a semester in like Vietnam and Malaysia. So, like, that was my expertise. I mean, I
Yeah.
knew more than the average bear about the Middle East, but that wasn't my focus.
Yeah.
So so I did
That's
this
not your
job,
area, really. Yeah.
and I was the first person to have the job. So I didn't replace anyone. I had to build everything out completely from scratch. And essentially, I found out really quickly that the real focus of my job was going to be, and this is what I would say was the most honest interpretation of it. This isn't how I would have said it at the time, but it was to uh, exploit people's religious beliefs and get them to embrace a completely unquestioning, uncritical view of the Israeli government that we would encourage them to see as like a manifestation of biblical Israel. And then to get, we would roughly work with the leadership, and then we would get the leadership to push their congregations to vote for candidates who would also embrace that view.
Yeah. Pro-Israel.
And yeah, and like, a lot of people maybe like haven't delved that deep into this world. It is truly weird. There was people I would meet with who would, we view it as a commandment from God to support what the Israeli government wants us to do. Like, and they would say themselves in an unquestioning way, uncritical, unquestioning, anything goes. And if anyone who doesn't come from like a fundamentalist Christian background needs to have it explained, like, the reason that they for the support was because these people essentially saw, or the primary reason was that they essentially saw Israel as the current day Israel country of Israel as a vehicle to help bring about the end times.
Right.
So
So
when
that's
they see
Christian
the
Zionism.
establishment,
Yeah,
right,
I was
it's
going to ask you, what is
premillennial
Christian Zionism?
dispensationism. Yeah, so like, that's a great question. So and it would depend on who you asked, because
Hmm.
there's two words there. There's Christian and Zionism, and the Christian, this was usually like pretty conservative evangelical Christians. They were definitely at the forefront of that, but we've made all sorts of outreach to the Catholic Church as well, which, if you don't know, like, the relations between the Vatican and Israel and worldwide, the Jewish community at large is very bad.
Hmm.
Uh, like, they didn't actually have diplomatic relations until the 1990s. Until 1965, the Catholic Church declared that essentially, like, all contemporary Jewish people at that time were responsible for the murder of Jesus, and that they ought to be regarded as such. So, like, none of that changes until Vatican II.
Right.
Like, the Catholic Church in Germany had, when during the 1940s and 30s, they had decreed that each church in Germany was to celebrate the birthday of Adolf Hitler every single year. Just a little background there. That's an aside.
Oh yeah.
So anyways, but back to your the kind of question of here going through the big arc of this is that so they see when these fundamentalist Christian types as when Israel gains independence in 1948, then they look at Revelation, they go, okay, so Israel exists in Revelation, so now we know we're one step closer. And so a lot of the motivation for them wanting to more and more Jewish people to immigrate to Israel is because they see this as a vehicle to bring about the rapture and the second coming.
Yeah, the end, Armageddon and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. So they know the next kind of probably step in this is that what's now the Al-Aqsa Mosque on top of the Temple Mount, where the second temple used to be before the Romans destroyed it, is that they want, and there's an organization called the Temple Institute in Israel.
Oh yeah.
And they've coordinated with a Texas rancher to get these unblemished red heifers over there to Israel, which they put as pets on the thing, which I don't know many people who slaughter their pets. But anyway, yeah, so like this organization is ready to go with this. There's lots of senior people in the Israeli government who I think would be eager to do this if the opportunity ever presents itself. So like hypothetically, let's say, Hamas or Hezbollah is, somewhat regularly launching rockets into Israel. Maybe a few of these hit the Al-Aqsa Mosque, or some mob of people just comes and dismantles this.
Yeah, just randomly happens to destroy the Dome of the Rock and all that.
There would be a very concerted effort to make a push to, instead of rebuild the Al-Aqsa Mosque, to build a third temple. And that would bring us again one step closer to this doomsday prophecy. And it's very deeply weird because, like at some point when you're not just passively observing this prophecy, these people are like actively trying to bring it about. So they want it to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's just a very, very dangerous thing. And this isn't random people. So our current U.S. ambassador to Israel is Mike Huckabee. He's a former governor of Arkansas, also former pastor, right? Yep. And he's made no secret whatsoever about the fact that his disposition towards the Israeli government and the way he views his role is at least in large part informed by his theology.
Yeah, he's a Christian Zionist for sure.
Yes. So very much U.S. foreign policy is being towards Israel and the wider Middle East is being distorted through this theological lens. And it in a very real sense, has become a national security vulnerability that can be exploited. And I think, and I was kind of central in this region to a lot of these sorts of efforts. I helped cultivate these relationships. For example, there's the Night to Honor Israel is an annual event that happens every year at John Hagee's church. He's a pastor in San Antonio. He leads Cornerstone Baptist Church. He's probably the most central figure in the Christian Zionist movement in America, at least for sure.
Yeah, he's always preaching about Israel and end times prophecies and all sorts. Yeah,
he's written books about it. Even I think he said the world was going to end in 2014, and then it didn't, and he just kept writing books.
Carried right on.
Yeah, so
he's not a false prophet or anything.
Every single year, the Consul General would participate in this event and give a speech, and I would write those speeches. And we sort of just took that same model and just applied it to this megachurch and this megachurch. Or we would, we would take part in these pastors' luncheons where a lot of pastors would get together. This is almost always kind of Christian nationalists, right-wing pastors. They talk about how their congregations are voting, how to get more politically involved. And I would coordinate with the leadership of these organizations to have the CG come and give a briefing about Israel. And the whole time we are encouraging a theological based support for the Israel government. And I was never once told tone it down on the religion stuff in these speeches. It was always add more of it.
Dial it up if anything.
So Genesis 12:3 for example, I will support those, bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. I was putting that into almost every single speech I would write. And so sometimes we're also just if the church was big enough, we were giving briefings to the church leadership. Like we did that at First Baptist Dallas with Robert Jeffress a number of times. I had multiple contacts at Daystar with the CG making appearances on Daystar. Also Victory Network, which is Kenneth Copeland's church. Like I've met Ed Young, I've met Kenneth Copeland, I met Joel Osteen once. He's actually the least bad of all the prosperity gospel folks, I would say, because he's the least political. Like he's almost just like good vibes. I mean,
Not
you still
saying
have
he's
the
a good
weird
guy, but
prosperity
yeah.
gospel stuff, but at least you don't have
The
like
Christian
cheering on
Zionism.
Armageddon behind it.
It's funny.
Yeah,
I was
so
just going to say, wait, before you go on, there's a lot of information coming at us.
yeah, sure. Feel free to
Going back, yeah, I mean, I can remember as a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s in Seattle area, and I was indoctrinated in the sort of the nascent movement of the Christian Zionism. It wasn't called that then, but going back to, what you said, they were exploiting this sort of baked in theology. Because I can remember growing up as a kid, hearing all this stuff, hearing that verse, over and over and over, that those who bless Israel will be blessed by God, and those who curse, so the basic argument that I heard politically growing up, my parents were Republicans, they were diehard Reaganites and Bush, all that kind of stuff, and they would have said, listen, we have to be on the right side of history, we have to be on the side of Israel, because we want America to become a Christian nation, therefore we want America to be blessed. So there's even just a basic theological premise, I think, isn't it, that's just absolutely baked in. You're coming along now decades later saying, let's ramp this up to a whole new level. Because, I mean, Christian Zionism is already huge. There's mega organizations. They take trips to the Holy Land. They encourage Christians to go. Yeah, I mean, so this is not a small movement. This is a huge movement. I mean, why did you guys need to take it to the next level? Why do you need to add more to it? What was their end game?
Yeah, so I think they really had the resources and the desire to really kind of cultivate as much support as they can get in the United States. I think just based on there's a lot of stuff happening here at the same time. So based on like the particularities of the Christian and Jewish theology, I think Israel is really the only country I can think of that could take this kind of advantage of this sort of situation like it is.
Yeah,
I mean,
unique to America for sure.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not like I don't see, I've never, I mean, maybe this exists, but I don't know of any like position at the Indian consulate that is trying to get Christians to support India because of some kind of connection between Hinduism and Christianity, because it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, and it couldn't happen here in the UK. I mean, British Israelism is a thing, but that's nothing compared to what you're talking about. I mean, they couldn't run a similar kind of a psyops operation, could they, here in the UK or in probably anywhere else in the world? It's got to be unique to American evangelicalism.
Yeah, I mean, there is a good push of it in a lot of like Central and South American countries as well, but it's definitely the heart of it is here in the US. There's also there's a very strong connection between the German government and the Israeli government, and I think that's based on this kind of national narrative that has a real sense of guilt and seeing the need to kind of atone for this. And
for the Holocaust,
I think some of the time, and some of that is totally valid, and some of it is kind of becomes like misguided at some point when it can get a little weird and nuts. Like for example, you have someone like Viktor Orban, who is frequently accused of being an anti-Semite himself, but he's a huge supporter of Israel. Him and Netanyahu are very close. And then sometimes you like anti-Semitism and that whole discussion can get very strange too, because you also have, I think it was Richard Spencer called Israel a model ethno-state. So sometimes you have people who are themselves admitted anti-Semites who support this government, and then sometimes you have many American Jews, for example, who have widely varying degrees of support or detestations of some of the conduct of Israel's war and the actions of its government.
Yeah, they're more pro-Palestine.
People like that in Israel themselves. So it's not a monolith anyway. So I mean, and then you mentioned the UK. So some of this goes always back to the 1917, the Balfour Declaration. And so Balfour himself he was a British parliamentarian or a member of the parliament, and
he was an MP.
He wanted to create the Jewish state because he wanted to get Jews out of the UK because he just didn't like them. And
it wasn't that he was.
I think there was right, and I think there was one Jewish member of parliament at the time who was like one of the only, and he voted against the Balfour Declaration. So I mean, so some of it goes all the way back to this kind of all comes to a head at the end of the 40s, and it's a very turbulent time in world history. You have people, ethnic groups, political
huge displacement all over the
all over the place
after World War II.
Yeah, and then you see people, once Israel's established, you see a lot of Palestinian or Arab people getting moved out of Israel, and then a lot of Jewish people from everywhere from Morocco to Iran, so either moving to Israel or sometimes being forcibly, essentially
relocated
to go to
Israel.
So I mean, it was a very messy, very chaotic, very violent process there.
I was going to say, because a lot of that I was going to mention that the Balfour Agreement, World War I, World War II. I tell people Lawrence of Arabia, that basic story, the modern day Syria, that was a result of, the British government, again, meddling in Arabic politics. And Lawrence of Arabia was told, look, if you can get the Arabs to help you fight the Turks, they can have their own homeland. And of course, then he found out later that he was absolutely lying to them, that they had no intention of giving it back to the Arabs after the war, which they did. They successfully helped him drive the Turks out, and then they turned around and gave it to the French, and it became a French colony. So these same kind of things come into play, don't they? Modern day Israel. I was told as a kid, when Israel became a state in 1948, that was a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. That was the most clear, like you said earlier. But the truth is, it was all machinations behind the scenes of these politicians in rooms in Europe and London making decisions about a modern state, creating the modern state of Israel. It wasn't a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. I would say now, absolutely not.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things there in this, in this whole process of decolonization, you have all these nationalist movements happening at the end of World War II. Like a lot of the early Zionists, people who wanted to set up Israel and immigrate, they were some of the most like secular people in Jewish communities around the world. Like they were not the ultra-Orthodox religious Jews. And in fact, a lot of the Orthodox, like ultra-Orthodox community at the time was very opposed to the idea of the establishment of Israel because they believed that shouldn't happen until the Messiah came. So and now it's kind of turned around, and now you have this ascendant religious Zionism group in Israel, made up of the ultra-Orthodox makes up part of it, but not all of it. A lot of the settler movement is religious, and these groups these are your Ben Gvir voters, your Smotrich voters, and it is very right-wing, and they are themselves fanatical, and they are in a lot of ways just similar to these Christian Zionists because they don't see it as we have to do this so that the Messiah comes back. They see it as we have to do this so the Messiah comes the first time. And so there are some of these people who are working just together like this. Like I've had many contacts who will explicitly say things like, well, it doesn't matter if you think he's coming for the first time or the second time. We all have the same goal for now, so we're all going to be working together.
Messiah.
And and
Christians think it's Jesus returning. Yeah, Jews might think it's someone else, but who cares? As long as he's got the name Messiah somewhere, we're cool with that.
And you're just sitting here going like, okay, so I guess if this plays out how you want it to, depending on which one of you is right, either the Christians are right, and I think it's something like a third of Jewish people convert to Christianity, and then the other two suffer in the tribulation, and yada yada yada. And then if the Jews are right, then it's just all of Christianity was just wrong the whole time. And I guess they're just we'll just wait till we get to that point before
we'll sort it out later.
See where the chips fall when that happens. And
but either way, you've got strong motivations on both sides. So now going back to your role at the consulate, so you're working with these mega churches, hugely influential pastors. You mentioned rattled off a bunch of names: Robert Jeffress and John Hagee and Joel Osteen, people like that. I mean, these people are running not just
Robert
mega
Morris,
churches. They're running satellite churches. They've got churches. I mean, I was trying to explain this to my girlfriend the other day. what she said, what's a satellite church? And I said, oh my God, this is a whole thing. There's not just enough now to
Hmm.
have one big mega church somewhere with 10,
Yeah, it's like a
15.
franchise.
You've got to
Yeah.
have 5, 10, 12 different satellite campuses around your region that you then
Hmm.
are overseeing. So yeah, it's like a franchise church. So these people have, what, over 100, maybe 100,000 people under their control in some way. So you're in there basically running a psy-op, trying to get these Christians to come on board with Christian Zionism. So going back to that question, what was the end game? Why was the Israeli embassy doing all this stuff? What would you say now? And is that where your religious trauma syndrome came from? Because you said you didn't have it as a kid. It was a pretty progressive upbringing. Was that where your RTS sort of comes into
Yeah,
play?
exactly. So yeah, I'll start with the second question there. Exactly. So like I even before I became an atheist, so that didn't happen until like 4 years in. So
Right.
literally it was like January of 2020. I was like, yeah, I can't
Yeah, I'm done.
go along. Like I don't believe in this anymore. But leading up to that, it was just a constant chipping away at these doubts because like I said, like I grew up in a really supportive kind of Christian tradition where it
Pretty
was
progressive.
none of this craziness.
Yeah, hellfire and
And
brimstone.
so I'm like dealing with Christian fundamentalism for like the first time, like face to face.
Right. You're being
Like I
exposed
knew
to it.
that these people were a thing, but I thought, oh, that's more marginal. Like
Yeah, it's a fringe
I
thing.
think I'd minimized it in my head, the size of it and how intense it is. And so I'm interacting with all these people constantly. And then, I would spend as much time as I could out of the office going to these different churches or these different meeting things and introducing myself to these people, making the connection and such. And I'm hearing them say how they see things, why they think it's so important to support Israel, and I'm just kind of like nodding along. And there was times when and it was never they never just wanted to talk about Israel. Like a lot of them, and I could tell they wanted to get me to kind of agree. So they would say like things like, "Oh, it's not okay to be gay," and like all the the social justice warriors are this huge problem, and
Yeah.
like so it was just like
The
down
woke
the list of
liberals.
okay, right wing, right wing, right wing, right wing, right. And then yeah, so I would end up like going to my car after these meetings, and sometimes I would literally just pray in the car, like asking God's forgiveness for doing this. And I was searching for a different job within like 1 month of working there. I
Yeah.
was like,
You
this is
wanted to get out
already
of
I
there.
can already tell this is not for me. I don't want to do this. And I didn't think before starting like, oh, now that this is on my resume for the types of places I would really want to work, this is going to
Yeah.
be a liability.
This is a black
And
mark on
like
your CV basically
yeah,
now.
and like
You made
it
a
would
huge
probably have been
mistake.
easy for me to get a job at APAC or something, but that's just like out of the frying pan into the fire. And then so I would go to these things, and I worked with a wider range of Israelis too, like everything from atheists, like Marxists, people who hated Netanyahu, Israelis, people who grew up in the kibbutzim, which are like the farming communes in southern Israel, which are like the most peace-loving Israelis you're
Yeah.
going to
Very
find,
liberal. Yeah.
all the
More
way to
progressive.
people who were hardcore into the religious Zionist movement, who loved Netanyahu or didn't think Netanyahu went far enough. So like everything in between there,
Yeah. It's
like
a
I've
huge
met
spectrum.
like yeah, and like all sorts of different traditions within like liberal or conservative, Orthodox, and then like ethnically you had the Ashkenazi Jews, Haredi Jews, you even met like Ethiopian Jews, and they make up like 1% of the population. In 8.5 years at working in the consulate, I met one Arab Israeli,
Wow.
which they make up 20% of the population of Israel. I easily met over 100, probably over 200 Israelis in 8.5 years, and I met one Arab Israeli that I worked with the entire time. I met more Black Israelis than Arab Israelis. So just to give you like, and I think everyone kind of knows why that is. But yeah, just going along with how this kind of slowly transitioned here. So a lot of the people I'm dealing with at work are saying I can kind of tell like they are not comfortable with what I'm doing. Some of them are like very cynically kind of exploiting it. Like I literally had the deputy CG at one point. Larry Huck's church is in DFW. It's called New Beginnings. He's a huge figure in the Christian Zionism movement, and I was explaining him all the theology behind why these people support Israel, And on the way, I don't know if it's okay to cuss, but anyway,
Yeah, go ahead.
on the way there, yeah, he says, I'm explaining all this to him, and he goes, these people give me the fucking creeps. What happens if they go back to thinking that their God doesn't like us again? And he said that like an hour before taking the stage in front of all these people and saying, oh, we're so grateful for your support. We share the same values.
So he's
So,
speaking
like,
about Jews. He's saying,
yeah, so,
yeah,
and
these
then
people give me the
he's
fucking
telling,
creeps. And
yeah,
he's going to go on
yeah,
stage in an hour, embracing everyone and acting like he's the best friend.
yeah.
And
So it was very, and like, so
really
you start to
two-faced.
feel really, really slimy just when that attitude is behind it, when the person you're writing the words for doesn't believe it, and then
Mm-hmm.
you start to not believe it as well. And yeah, so eventually
Yeah, very cynical.
I'm seeing the cynical side of things, I've seen the fanatical side of things, and then I'm obviously you're just sitting there. And it's one thing like to sit in your home and do your thing, and like, oh, these people on this side of the world or my next door neighbor disagrees with me. But it's another thing to be like constantly engaged with it 40 hours a week and your livelihood's on it, and you're just sitting here thinking, well, you can't both be right. And
Yeah.
then eventually, especially into the third consul general I was under, she very much wanted, this is my idea too, as the whole time I was saying, hey, we need to be doing more, like I'm an interfaith director essentially. I'm not just the Christian community director. Like we should be doing more stuff with other minority faiths, the Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims too. And like they didn't really want to do this until I suggested it many times and it was always shut down. And then it wasn't until I said it this way. I go, right now, if a journalist asked you, hey, 20% of your population are Muslims, what kind of events have y'all done with the Muslim community here in Houston or wherever?
Yeah.
And
What
they
kind of
wouldn't have
outreach
anything
to
to
that
point to.
community?
And so
Zero,
once I
basically.
said that, they were like, oh, okay, we get it now. Like it
Oh,
would look
right.
bad. And I was like, yeah, it would look bad. So like, and I thought
Yeah, bad
foolishly,
optics.
I thought I could turn that into something sincere
Yeah,
or
positive.
authentic, and that just didn't work. I mean, it worked on paper, it worked in public, but I was again like putting on a completely different mask when I was engaging with these people
Yeah,
versus with these people.
it's all a
I
facade.
mean,
So they didn't
and
really
it
care
wasn't,
about the 20% of Arab Israelis, essentially. They're like, no, we got to go after these Christian Zionists and
yeah,
cultivate
and it
that
was
relationship.
yeah, and then we'll do this other thing as kind of a sideshow, like as like essentially a cover our ass move. Like
Yeah, it's a fig
this
leaf
is
sort
like
of
a
thing.
damage control thing to be, but like, no, look, we're doing the right, like
Yeah, look how good we
we
are.
don't,
We're reaching
yeah,
out to the
exactly.
Arabic community.
And it wasn't just conservative Christianity either that we would do this like do. We just had a completely different approach that I would use when we did outreach to this community. So like whenever I would be like I met like there was here for one example, like there was a trip to Dallas, I can remember the CD taking, where I arranged a meeting with Robert Jeffress of First Baptist Church, who super right wing and
Oh,
like an
yeah.
advisor to
Big
Trump,
Trump
everything.
guy.
Yeah, and then I also arranged a meeting on the same trip with Neil Thomas, who's the pastor at Cathedral of Hope, which is the largest affirming church in the country. So when we're talking to the hardcore Christian Zionist evangelicals, it's all about support Israel and like the subtext is here because we want the
Yeah.
end times to happen. And then
Eschatology.
when we were talking to the affirming churches, it's Israel's the only place in the Middle East where it's safe to be gay. And so we really push hard into that and just ignore the other things. And meanwhile, just aren't telling each other like, oh, we're also talking to them,
Oh,
and
yeah.
we're
By the
also
way,
talking to them.
we're talking
So
to Robert
it felt
Jeffress's Christian Zionist fundamentalists who
exactly
hate the LGBT community and want to outlaw it.
who's just like a few miles down the road.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like
so
the
like
two-face
I
sort of
mean,
thing.
yeah, and you can kind of see how like some of this, I guess, from the Israeli perspective, is just like, well, we want to get all the support we can. Our country isn't exactly loved throughout the world. They would try to get it wherever they could, but it was something deeply like inauthentic and at times really deceitful, manipulative, exploitive. That was really felt really gross. And you're just
Mm-hmm.
doing that for 40 hours a week. And then I would describe it as, and yeah, so eventually I just couldn't take that anymore. And so I knew none of it was real. And around 2020, and I still kept doing it. And that's when it got even more twisted because I'm just like I'm sitting, like, I like pretending to pray is a really weird, degrading thing that messes with your head. Like I'm writing all these speeches and I don't believe any of it. And then people are coming. Sometimes I would deliver remarks at churches because the CG would be out on another trip or something. And I would have people come up, like I would say all the stuff, and then people would come to me and they're like, that was so much I could
So
really hear
moving.
like the Spirit of God in you when you like saying all this stuff. And I'm just like, really? Because
If you only knew.
I
It's
didn't.
all bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I'm so badly wanting to just scream out, like, y'all are all being like, either
You're being
they're
laid
tricked,
here.
or you're like very much just all in on this nuts. Like, you literally want the world to end.
Yeah.
And
You got
like
some major cognitive dissonance.
when you hear that, yeah. So that was just the sea I was swimming in for like years, for 40 hours a week. And then I would describe it as like, imagine like you're holding your hand over a candle for like a really long time, and just when it you think like, I can't do this anymore, this hurts so bad. Imagine like someone coming up behind you and throwing like a bucket of gasoline on you. And that's what it was like when October 7th happened. And when the war started, all these things I was feeling just got dialed up like exponentially higher than I.
Yeah, so this is the Hamas attack on Israel. If people, if anyone doesn't know what you're talking about, what launched all this,
and like,
Project Esther and everything else.
Yeah, and I've got no love for Hamas whatsoever. I think like, they're an insane religious fanatic group themselves. Like, I mean, we could go on and on and on about how weird that is. Like, I've seen so much of the raw footage from those attacks. It's Allahu Akbar the entire time. I've seen people getting decapitated while every single swing of it is Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Like, it's nonstop. Jubilant look on people's faces when they're doing this. Like, I can remember, and like, that got so weird because now, and I had started writing like a journal thing, which eventually became a book draft. But when that happened, I was like, I stopped writing for like months because I was like, I'm afraid this is going to get swept up in some kind of security thing. And I don't know what will happen if that happens. I felt super guilty because some of what I was writing, I was like, oh, I'm so clever. I'm so clever. And like, then this happens. And then I feel bad about feeling bad for myself when there's people getting kidnapped or getting bombs dropped on them. And then I'm still like cultivating all this support, and a lot of it's super theologically based. It's very weird. But like, I can remember I think it was like the first Monday back after that. And we worked on that Sunday, right after the attacks too, like as an emergency thing. But yeah, so I think the chief of staff was gone that first day for some reason. And I remember I was filling in for that person. So I was doing my job and doing that person's job. And the phone is just ringing off the hook. And so I'm answering all these calls while I'm trying to do other things with emails and other things. And we were going to send out a series of like a letter and a series of some of the footage from the attacks to the entire congressional delegation in our region. So every single senator and every single representative from all those 5 states. And so I put that whole email list together. And then the deputy CG comes up to me, my boss, and says, hey, I've got all these videos. I'm going to send them to you. Go through and watch them and find ones that are shocking, but not too shocking. That's the phrase he used. So I'm sitting here just watching this stuff, answering these calls.
That's very traumatic anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, so
watching
and like
people get decapitated and terrorist attack.
And shot. And anyway, like, I remember answering one of these calls this day when I'm trying to also do this stuff. And this guy goes, yeah, I was wondering if I just think what's happened so horrible. Can I make a donation? And I was like, sure, yeah, we have a number of charities that we're trying to do stuff with, to, for medical assistance and what have you, all this sorts of different things. And I was going to share that. He goes, no, I have ammunition that I would like to donate. And I was like, like, what? And he goes, yeah, I have ammunition that I call no ticket to paradise rounds, NTTP rounds that I've dipped in pig's blood. And I'm just like,
okay.
you're like, and
really?
So I would get calls like, even before the war, it was about like once a year I would get a call from like a crazy person who thought the world was ending. I saved some of these like answering machine messages I got or letters we got. But yeah, all that just got crazy cranked up. And like a lot of it was actually kind of radicalizing for me because I was still like almost like a coexist bumper sticker became a person. Like I was very much, especially when I first started there before being an atheist, I was like, well, all the religions kind of say the same thing and none of them are really any worse. And like, yeah, I don't really totally agree
Not
with
so
that anymore.
much.
I do think there's like I do think there's a level of like dignity and that goes along with how we ought to treat our fellow citizens and people around us and everything. But with that being said, like, yeah, it was super radicalizing to watch all this and being like, yeah, I don't know how anyone can live next to a group like Hamas and have this. So I really did want like I wanted some of the best talking points that Israeli officials were saying to be true, and but I couldn't ignore much of the rhetoric from some of the top echelons of power in Israel was genocidal and based on theological language from day one,
Mm.
including from like the prime minister himself, who compared the situation to Amalek, and not in an off-the-cuff thing. He said this in the prepared remarks.
Yeah, it
So it
wasn't
wasn't
just
like,
a
oh,
random
maybe
comment.
I went a little farther. Yeah,
Yeah, it was a
and
written speech form or something.
yeah, and you can like there's been so many people in the dialogue with this who want to like talk about well the ethics of what they'll say collateral damage, which is a pretty dehumanizing phrase from the get-go. But they're saying, well, if a group hijacks a hospital or a school and uses it for military purposes, it's actually legally on international law on them what happens when it gets targeted. And I'm gonna go, okay, that sounds a little shaky, weird, and I don't
Mm.
hear a lot of these people being particularly torn up about the fact that they're bombing schools and hospitals. But even if I were to like, just for the sake of argument, grant you everything you're saying about that, you would still be like sitting there looking like an crazy person having to defend a deliberate starvation campaign where it's like we're not even going to let formula in, which only infants eat.
Yeah.
At some point, it just got
What
so
threat do they pose?
yeah,
Yeah,
and
it
it
is
got so
genocidal.
so cartoonishly evil and indefensible that I just couldn't. I was completely dysfunctional by like the last few months there. I
Yeah,
like
just couldn't
found it.
cope anymore.
Yeah, I had to get on anxiety medication. Like there was times like I lost like 25 pounds there because I found it difficult to eat at work.
Yeah, you were
I
just
would
that
sometimes just
stressed
like
out.
break down in the bathroom because of what I was involved with. I still have sometimes I have nightmares where I'm just back at work.
Yeah, it's such a
And like
nightmarish
I don't know how
situation.
I ended up there and I'm just like, oh no, I'm here. Because I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've had similar dreams where I just all of a sudden like I'm in the dream and I'm drunk or I'm drinking at some party. I'm just like, oh no, I'm not supposed to be doing that.
Yeah,
Like, and
I'm
I freak
falling
out. And
off the
it's the
wagon.
same kind of a trauma, or the same kind of
Yeah,
a
very
nightmare
triggering.
that comes with that. And yeah, eventually I was just like, I think if I keep doing this, like it will kill me. Like I can't do it anymore. And it wasn't, so it was a combination of three things. It was this constant state of moral conflict about Israel's conduct in the war and what I was involved in a PR sense, essentially like
Yeah, you're
wrapping
propping
this
it
all
up
up
basically.
in a Christian bow to make people be able to stomach easier or even root on as this kind of insane theological fantasy, like doomsday prophet thing. So there was that. Then there was like living in a constant state of concealment about being an atheist while being a interfaith,
Yeah, for me.
religious
Yeah.
position director, like running this religious psy-op. And then the third thing was there was actually like threats made against our physical safety
Mm.
regularly. So like there was a bomb threat once when I was at the consulate. It was not a fun experience. We had to cancel multiple events because of bomb and arson threats. Then once I was on my home scrolling through the news and I see FBI arrests man threatening who was planning to attack Israeli consulate in Houston. So like
Yeah. So this is your
his
work.
name
Yeah.
was Yeah, his name is Anas Saeed. He got arrested by the FBI. He had sworn his allegiance to ISIS, and he was actively making plans, trying to figure out the physical layout of the facility, the security protocols, and any kind of routine he could figure out to do an attack on there, as well as on other like Jewish community sites in the city. And I didn't even find out about that at work. I just found out about it
Yeah, just
later.
saw it on the news.
And I was, and then not long after that, the embassy workers in DC got killed. And it's so, I think, traumatic in a way, just not just for me personally, but on like a national consciousness level. Like this conflict is happening on the other side of the world, and because our people come from everywhere, which I think is a really beautiful and great thing about this country, but we're importing all this drama and this trauma from this conflict. So it was just like drinking out of a fire hose, because every few days it was like, oh, these Palestinian students in Vermont get shot, and then the next day it was, or whatever, it was this crowd of people asking for the release of the hostages, get a Molotov cocktail thrown at them, and this elderly woman burns to death, or this kid at Tulane gets punched in the face, or yeah, I mean, it just didn't stop there. I mean, in Houston, there was, I think it was a high school, like 3 Muslim girls who I don't even think they were Palestinian or had any connection there. They were, born here. And they just get like assaulted and hospitalized because a mob of their fellow students just beat them like savagely.
Just over their views.
And I mean, or not even, maybe not even their views, just like what their views were assumed to be because of their last name or how they appear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
in the end, I was gonna say, so how did you get out? Are you kind of seeing yourself now as a whistleblower? Because obviously this is a major story, isn't it? Talking about basically a psy-op, like you said, running this operation on Christian Zionism and trying to garner support for Israel, and then this attack happens and the aftermath of it. How did you get out, and what are you doing now to sort of get yourself back on track?
Yeah, so now, I mean, I don't think whistleblower is the right term. I mean, in a way that feels right, but, a lot of this stuff was public knowledge anyways. I'm just kind of shining this huge spotlight on it, and I feel like I'm in a very uniquely positioned place to not only say, hey, I think this particular conflict is very problematic and something that we should not be associated with in funding and giving diplomatic cover to the way that we are. But in addition to that, I think, extreme religious dogmatism is a serious problem in its own way. And I want to also just kind of shine a light on that. And I don't want, all of this is like saying, I would very much encourage as many people as possible to, of their own volition, step away from that. Like I don't think there should be any kind of coercion with it all, but I do think there needs to be a kind of campaign of like and that people need to point out like, hey, this is madness. When you're sitting here either rooting for Armageddon, or people want to strap on a suicide vest and blow themselves up at some synagogue because they connect this to this government on the other side of the world. I think this is all insane. So like, and it's weird coming out to say this. Like when I first went into IR for school, I assumed like I was going to be working at like a nonprofit doing development work in India. That was kind of the goal.
Yeah, Pakistan, India, somewhere like that.
Yeah, and I never would have expected like, oh, I would end up doing this religious psy-op thing. And I don't think I would have ever become an atheist had I not done this job. So now I'm kind of just slowly through this process. It is cathartic for me. It is still a whirlwind of emotions, and like I'm not like a hero in this story at all. Like
you're part of it, unfortunately.
Involved in this, yeah, even though I knew it was wrong for way too long. And so if anything, the message I want to give is like, be better than I was, dude. And like, be a little brave and like take some agency and control of your own life, because you can rationalize it so many ways. You'll tell yourself, well, if I wasn't doing it, somebody who was really, really serious would be doing this, and they would be really trying harder and it would be worse. Or like, oh, well, I have no choice because it's this or unemployment. And like I've said it before, I'll say it again, there are things that are worse than being unemployed.
Yeah. Giving up your own sense of integrity and all that.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
and I can look in the mirror and, or there was times when I would look in the mirror and it wasn't just that I didn't recognize the person I saw, I hated the person that I saw. And I know exactly how, like, the price of my integrity is because
Yeah, you
I
paid
got
it.
paid that amount.
Yeah, you could put a monetary figure on. This is good news, though, in the sense. I mean, I remember when we talked a few months ago. Just called you had a WhatsApp call. You said,
Hmm.
"I'm not sure if I even want to come, out with this story publicly." So look at that. This is also cathartic, isn't it? You've been on a couple of podcasts, I think, telling your story. So that's a good sort of piece to this journey, isn't it? You're brave enough now,
Hmm.
and I think you said you're working on maybe a book as well, telling the story. So
Yeah.
that's all part of the process. I was going to ask you, how can people get a hold of you? Are you out there on social media? If they said, "Hey, Brandt, I want to hear more about your story, read your book when it finally comes out," what's the best way to find you? Or do you want to be found?
That's
I
a
don't
good
know.
question.
Maybe you don't.
Well, I'm not actually on social media. Like I kind of I think social media has some value, but well, I do think it's a net negative for society. So I'm trying to
Yeah,
spend
kind of
as
steer
little
clear of that.
time on it as I can. But so like I said, I've been writing articles on for the Libertarian Institute. You can probably use the contact thing from there, and if I can that can get sent to me personally, that's probably the best way to reach me. But yeah, right now I don't have a publisher, so the book is kind of just its own sort of side project. But I'm eager to really get that out there because I think that that can really, sometimes it's easy to get kind of unfocused on when you're doing the speaking off the cuff in the
Sure.
podcast world, and I think the book is a chance to really nail down exactly. Here's a pretty comprehensive list of everything I can remember that happened. So the book is supposed to be it's part tell-all book, but it's also part kind of philosophical memoir and conversion story where I want to like relate a lot of my experiences doing this job, but also other things to, arguments about the existence or non-existence of any God, and also, use my IR background to kind of say, here's how this shapes power, and this isn't like some old school thing. This is happening in the 21st century
Yeah,
still.
it's happening right now. Well, yeah,
Hmm.
it's good that you're out there for sure. So what I'll do, I'll put some links in the show. If you can send me the links to your articles, like I said,
Sure.
people can read your stuff. People can get out there. I'll share what I can, and then I'm sure we'll keep in touch. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I'm glad you're telling your story. It is kind of a crazy one. I think people would not be able to identify with it, but you had obviously you were an insider. You saw this stuff. You were part of it. You were promoting it. So I really applaud that you've gotten out there. So thanks, Brent, so much for telling your story. I'm sure we'll stay in touch and see how things develop with your book as well.
Yeah, and I would love to stay in touch. And yeah, thanks for having me on. And really enjoyed your book. And it sounded like you were kind of hinting at a second one there, more about like I guess when you were actually on the teaching side of, and that would be the focus of it. And I'd really be curious to read that one too, just because I feel like that one I could definitely relate to in a sense, unfortunately. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
when you're in the
and
leadership side,
I've
that's
really
my
enjoyed
plan.
yeah, I really enjoyed reading it and getting to hear your story and through your podcast as well. You've got some really interesting conversations here, so it's really great to be a part of it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brent. I'm sure we'll stay in touch. Take care and have yourself a great day.
All right, you too.